one thing that I do want to start out with is the general election forecast stuff going on right now. So, if you've been following the news, you may be aware that the 538 polling stuff, or I should say, the 538 predicting model just came out and it released its model. And a lot of people were really shocked. A lot of people were really surprised to see the model come out basically exactly the same that the Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump matchup was the night before the election. Now, there's a lot of important nuance to be added here. We can't just sort of straight plug it through. But this is a lot of people were really worried when they saw these numbers come out. Chris, did you see these numbers? What's your thought on this?
Yeah, so I guess it didn't. We're so far ahead at this point. I mean, ahead as far as like having what still 90 days left or 85 days left or something like that. I feel like there's so much time left that getting too wrapped up over the polls and what they say right now is probably just an exercise in frustrating oneself because there's so much that can change. And will change likely in all of that amount of time. So I try not to get too upset about anything this far out.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the important thing to put our fingers on here because one of the major differences, of course, between the prediction model now as it stands today compared to the prediction model that people are comparing it to when it comes to Hillary Clinton is the fact that that prediction model that they're talking about when it comes to Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump was the day before the election. So the model as it stands today has a lot of what we might call uncertainty built into the prediction model. And so there's various kinds of mathematical techniques that you can use to build in the fact that literally things can happen boom all the time and we don't really know what's going on. So in a normal typical year, you'll have about 10 stories in the New York Times which cover the entire front page, where a single story covers the entire front page. You have things like impeachment, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this year already, and we're only in August, we've had 30. We've had 30 when usually in an entire year you only have about 10. And so that leads me to think that there's a lot more unpredictability going on this time around than maybe even a normal election cycle. And so it's quite possible that things can change around really quickly. And the 538 prediction model actually is able to factor in things like that. Now, I'm not saying that the 538 prediction model is absolutely perfect, right? But it is, at least when it came to the 2016 last time around, it was a lot more accurate than like the HuffPost model, which gave Donald Trump like a 95% chance of losing to Hillary Clinton. And the New York Times model, I think, gave like 90% chance. The 538 model, again, as you can see, we said that it was like, basically the same there. I think last time it was like 28 out of 100 for Donald Trump or whatever, and then 72 or something about that for Hillary Clinton. And so it is the case that that model, the 538 model, was a lot more accurate than a lot of the other models. And they've also expanded their data set. So now they're including economic data and how that affected polling going all the way back to the 1880s. So it's actually quite an extensive database, and they have modified their polls. They have modified their algorithm. So I do think that there's been a lot of changes to this particular prediction model compared to last time around. But that said, still definitely worrisome. Definitely worrisome.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to statistics, right? And statistics is a very messy subject. It's about, you're trying to fill in information that you don't have access to.
Right.
And, people like to go, oh, well, the polls were wrong last time. Well, if 538 gives you one person an 80% chance of winning and the other person 20, that means if you run that experiment 5 times, Donald Trump wins 1 out of 5 times. And that's what happens, right? I mean, it's the same with you flip a coin, you expect it to come up heads or tails about half the time, but if you flip a coin 10 times, you could get 8 tails. Like that's how probability works, right? And so they're trying to fill that whole subject. You're trying to fill in gaps of unknown information, and it's a messy business. And this far out, I mean, we have primaries that haven't even been conducted yet, and that seems like very important information if you're trying to figure out, what is the state of mind of a state and how they're going to vote. Them actually voting seems like a pretty important piece of information that would be very beneficial once you're able to start factoring those things into your model and see how things go from there.
Yeah, it's definitely really important to be able to keep that in mind. Keep the fact in mind that, like, we don't know all the information, we don't know all the facts, and that's why prediction models exist. In fact, more technically speaking, it's not actually providing an estimate for how likely a candidate is to win. It's technically modeling reality. So more accurately, the model is saying this is the likelihood that this model represents reality if reality, and this is the key word in the asterisk, if reality has the same cleavages that we, or explanatory cleavages that we have written into the model, right? So that's, first of all, that's a question. Does reality have the same explanatory cleavages where, race and class, et cetera, are these sort of explanatory cleavages which explain things? And then also, even if it does, it's only describing, well, there's a 73% chance that this model reflects reality if the world has those cleavages. So there are a lot of questions when it comes to prediction models. It's definitely a messy science if it is a science. And so, no, we can't ever be entirely sure what's going to happen. That said, though, even, all of that said, it still is really interesting to see a situation where we're still looking at a very large win slide, right? I mean, you're talking right now
Right.
at, a 73% chance there. I mean, that's pretty big, and you can still see some of these dots here. On the model going all the way out, suggesting that like Biden could have, there's a very, very, very small chance here of having over 500 electoral votes. Most likely, of course, it's going to be closer to, about that middle point, having a 300 something point win. But I mean, these are all possibilities in the world, and we need to keep that in mind when we look at this, when we look at prediction models, when we look at polling data. And it's really just sort of important to keep in mind.
Yeah, and also you have a little bit of this idea, that sometimes pops up in movies where someone makes a prediction and then that ends up actually affecting the outcomes of things because, these kinds of polls and predictions are made, but then the campaigns are paying attention to those exact polls and predictions and then making decisions based on those polls, right? Now, what state should we be focusing on?
Right.
And so this kind of stuff coming out actually changes the decisions that people are making, which then, of course, changes the model, a little bit later, and that model has to be rerun to take into account the new actions. So statistics is a messy game in general, and then just applying it to politics makes it absolutely a weird game.
Yeah, and also in politics, there's all these sort of black swan moments. There's all these moments where things can suddenly change, or even there's all these moments where there's a sudden burst, a sudden boom. Usually a candidate gets a convention bump. We'll have to see if these coming weeks, if Joe Biden gets a convention bump. Some people are arguing that he won't get a convention bump because it's just going to be online. It's just on Zoom. Who really cares? Is anybody going to watch it? Some people argue, hey, he might even get a bigger convention bump than usual because of the fact that everybody's at home. So they're like, well, shoot, I'll see what's going on. I'll see what's going on in the Democratic convention. So nobody really has any idea what's going to happen when it comes to this convention bump. But my point being this, what if there is a convention bump, there'll be a spike, and usually it means it's a bump, which means it goes back down. People get excited and they'll say, oh, I'll vote for Biden. Sure, what the heck? And then it starts to change, and then it starts to go around. Now, apparently Nate Silver has modified this model, and 538 has modified this model to be a little bit more conservative when it comes to bumps, so it won't sort of have those kinds of drastic swings as a result of sudden bumps. And I mean, this was apparently like quite difficult to engineer in, and I imagine that it was quite difficult to engineer in because it's hard to tell at the basis of polls like what things are bumps and what things are not bumps. So it's it's hard to know, and so apparently the way that it's going to factor it in is it's going to hold anytime that there's a spike, it's going to hold the previous data for about 2 weeks and then see how much of that data, using various kinds of correlations, see how much of that data it should carry over after the resulting 2 weeks. It weighs it at like a 40% margin or something like that. So it's an interesting approach to taking it. Definitely an interesting approach to measurements. Measuring things is always tricky, no matter what.
And I think you are going to see a spike. I mean, did you see the numbers for the donations after Biden made his VP announcement? It was like, I forget what the number was, but some crazy amount of money was donated like the one following day. So even something that I didn't think was that exciting of an announcement would really get people that pumped up apparently turned into massive donations for him. So either through money or attention, I expect they're going to get something after the convention.
Well, apparently part of the reason, or at least the main reason why Kamala Harris was even selected for a VP was because of the fact that she was a good fundraiser. So they held various kinds of fundraising on the basis
Right.
of names and, sort of seeing which name would raise the most money. And then, oh, turns out Kamala Harris raised a whole bunch of money. Guess she better be the VP pick. So, maybe
Yeah.
it's unsurprising. Maybe it's not surprising, unfortunately, using Wall Street to decide who should be the VP pick. But
Which is unfortunate considering so many of us want to get money out of politics, and yet they're literally self-selecting each other for the
on the
people who can bring in the most money.
Right, which of course just creates entrenched interest to make it less and less likely that we're going to get money out of politics, because it turns out that all these politicians recognize that the reason why they're in the place that they are in is because they have a certain skill set. So you change around the skill
Right.
sets necessary to be successful in politics, well, then they're going to be the ones who maybe get wiped out. So,
Right.
yeah, we have all kinds of problems out there. So, anyway, I just wanted to introduce you guys to this Nate Silver model, chat a little bit about it.